going to get started. So first off, I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Justin Jones. I'm the project manager for the Temiskaming Shores Active Transportation Plan with WSP Canada. I'm an active transportation planner and community engagement specialist. This evening, I'm joining you from the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Hurons of the Wendat, and the Petun people. Today, this is known as Collingwood, Ontario. We are all settlers on this land, and we owe a debt of gratitude to those who've come before us. And we owe the land that we are on a debt of service as we continue to maintain it for generations that follow. And that's really why we're here today, is to talk about the Active Transportation Plan and how that plan can help us to forge a more sustainable and active future for the city of Temiskaming Shores. So I'm going to run through a little bit of an introduction to the entire process here, and we'll get moving and talk a little bit about what the Active Transportation Plan has found and how we are proposing the city move forward to build a better community for walking, cycling, and wheeling. So I'm just going to go through a really quick introduction just to make sure that everyone understands the how-to, and then I will go around the virtual table here, and I'll introduce the rest of my team from WSP, as well as our project manager from the city. So the how-to for tonight, just to let everyone know, we are using a Zoom webinar platform, so your cameras are automatically turned off. You do have access to the chat functionality. So we'd really appreciate it if you could tell us who you are, who you're representing here today, and let us know what you're excited about for the Active Transportation Plan in Temiskaming Shores. So please make use of that chat function. It's a wonderful way to communicate with the other participants here this evening. We also have the Q&A function up and operational. So if you ask questions in that, we'll be able to respond to those questions, and those will become part of our public record as well. And if you're a little bit more of a in-person kind of person like myself, and you would like to speak, please feel free to use the reaction button and use the raise hand function, and that will bump you right up to the top of the attendee list. It will let me know that you'd like to ask a question, and we can unmute you and respond to your question verbally. I will just note that we are recording this session, so if you do choose to raise your hand and ask a question, just note that that will be recorded. So I would like now to go around and provide an introduction to our project team, the folks that are on the call today. So I'd like to start off by introducing our project principal. He's our manager or the national lead for active transportation with WSP Canada, Dave McLaughlin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Justin, and thank you, everyone else. And I'll pass it over to Amanda.
Hello, my name is Amanda Gebert, and I am a landscape architect by trade, but a off-road trail design specialist.
Let's go to Erica.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Stone. I'm a transportation planner at WSP. My work focuses on active transportation as well as public and stakeholder engagement.
And we'll turn it over to Matt from the city of Temiskaming Shores.
Hi everyone, Matthew Bain here. I'm the Director of Recreation for the City of Temiskaming Shores, and I was the project lead for this project. So happy to be here and present this information to the general public.
Fantastic. I will just note, if you are using the chat, the default for the chat will just send the message to hosts and panelists. I recommend that you change it to send it to everyone. So hopefully everyone is able to access the chat. I think that's available to you guys all. Do you guys have access to the chat as participants? I guess it's kind of hard to, okay, there we go. We have a yes. that makes it easy. If there was deafening silence, then I would have been a little more concerned. Okay, Upwards and onwards. So the active transportation plan for Temiskaming Shores was developed with the project purpose of identifying a continuous active transportation network that builds upon the existing routes like the Stato Trail and connects all three communities within the city, so New Liskeard, Diamond, and Haileybury. We were also aiming to develop a project not only focused on the physical infrastructure, but also on the social infrastructure to support active transportation through expansion of education and promotion to raise awareness of active transportation and normalize walking and cycling as everyday travel options. And then we were definitely focused on ensuring that the community's interests were addressed in a plan that outlines short and long-term actions. So we want to see the type of investments that are going to connect the existing network, as well as develop the type of network moving forward that's going to solidify Temiskaming Shores' reputation as a leader when it comes to active transportation in Northern Ontario. Not entirely sure why it's not skipping ahead. So just before we get started, I just want to highlight what a master plan is and what a master plan is not. A master plan is a long-term vision. It's a flexible document, so it's not prescriptive. It's a community building asset and a communications tool, so it helps to define how things should be implemented as you move forward. It's an implementation guide, and it's a support for existing initiatives and plans. It really is another layer of planning and policy document that supports the city's long-term plans as outlined by different examples like the official plan, the Parks and Recreation plan, and then the active transportation plan kind of sits within that hierarchy. What a master plan is not is detailed or final design. So we're not getting out and doing detailed design of any specific corridor. It's not the authority to construct. It's not prescriptive. It's not a requirement, and it doesn't carry with it any financial commitment. What it is it's a series of recommendations that help to guide investments as they move forward. It provides a roadmap should the city wish to take it. So our project schedule, where we've been. So we started off in April. It's been a relatively quick project, and we worked through identifying existing conditions, identifying a preferred active transportation network. And then we moved on into developing an implementation strategy and establishing educational, promotional, and programming recommendations. And now here we are, writing the master plan report and presenting it to all of you. So in terms of engagement, what's been completed to date is we've held a kickoff meeting, we've held interviews with key stakeholders from around the community, we've reviewed and mapped existing conditions, we've identified potential locations for improvement, including kind of talking to the community about the hot spots and the places that they'd most like to see investments. We've launched an online survey. We've attended different meetings in terms of active school travel and discussions with Public Works Committee. We did our stakeholder workshop, and then we've had another stakeholder workshop, which was used to help refine our programming recommendations, which we'll get to near the end of this presentation. We also undertook a policy review. So as I mentioned, an active transportation plan sits within the overall policy of the municipality. And in this instance, we looked at the official plan, the recreation master plan, the age-friendly community plan, the greenhouse gas reduction plan, and a few others, the culture plan that is there, the cultural plan that's there. And so we really looked to see how we could situate the active transportation plan within the objectives that the city has already agreed to within these previous documents. And so after reviewing all of those plans, what we come up with is a vision and objectives for the active transportation plan. So these are really the foundational aspects of the plan that help to guide the decisions as we move the plan forward. So the vision for the active transportation plan, and I'm going to read this verbatim in its entirety, just because I think that it is a relatively important statement to frame the rest of the conversation that we have here. Is that active transportation in Temiskaming Shores will be safe and accessible and contribute to a healthy, sustainable, and supportive community where people of all ages and abilities can participate. So the way that we developed that vision is not only through consultation with key stakeholders in the community, but also through essentially pulling the different aspects of the city's previously approved planning documents and pulling those together into a vision statement for the active transportation plan that aligns directly with what's already been proposed and already been approved by the city when it comes to their planning documents, their strategic direction, their vision, their overall way of managing the community. To support the vision, we developed a series of 5 different objectives. And so these objectives are the things through which we were looking at every decision as we made it through the active transportation plan. So the objectives are to enhance safety, improve the maintenance of existing facilities, raise the awareness about active transportation, improve transportation equity, and create connectivity within the community. I'm not going to talk too much about this because, but I do want to highlight the fact that, you know, we have been doing engagement throughout the process here in Temiskaming Shores, talking to key stakeholders and folks that are deeply involved, as well as doing stakeholder surveys and also launching an online survey that we saw a very strong response to. So we've really been trying to connect with the community to understand what the priorities are within the municipality as we move forward. So the key themes from the engagement that we heard were that Temiskaming Shores already has a really strong foundation of walking and cycling. When we asked people how they're getting around, what we found is that the Statistics Canada numbers, the things that show, you know, kind of 1 or 2% of people walking and cycling, those really didn't paint the whole picture, because those questions only ask what your primary mode of transportation is. But what we found is that, you know, people in Temiskaming Shores are multimodal. They're getting around by walking, by cycling, by driving, by transit. You know, they're not locked into one particular mode of transportation. And especially using the Stato Trail as that key foundation. Some of the barriers to walking and cycling are mostly infrastructure related. So lack of adequate facilities, the conditions of the sidewalk and trails, and the speed and noise of motor vehicle traffic. Now, this can sound like a negative thing, but in reality, what this shows us is that it's not the environmental factors that are keeping people from walking and cycling. Weather, distance, time, those were issues that were identified much less frequently than the physical infrastructure changes. So, you know, you can't change the weather, but you can change the infrastructure. And so that's why we are, you know, relatively bullish about the fact that those barriers are mostly infrastructure related. Those are the kinds of things that a municipality can change. Oops, sorry. Some of the other key themes, there is a clear desire to improve walkability in Temiskaming Shores. We came into this project, I will admit, you know, kind of my own bias, that we came into this project really looking at a lot of the cycling infrastructure and needs for cycling. And we really quickly heard that we needed to prioritize walkability and connectivity for walking infrastructure. So we shifted our focus, and we also really incorporated some of those recommendations that we heard from stakeholders and from the public to make sure that walkability was the focus of this active transportation plan as much as bikeability was. The other pieces that we heard are that most destinations in Temiskaming Shores are accessible by walking or cycling based on how long people are willing to travel. So based on the amount of time that folks say they're willing to travel to get to their destination by walking or cycling, almost everything within the urban areas is accessible by walking or cycling within like kind of a 5-minute bike or a 15-minute walk. So because of the compact urban form of the the communities that make up the city, it is a relatively easy community to get around distance-wise using active transportation. A couple more key themes are that these won't come as a surprise. Really, the existing Stato Trail really is a foundation, and it's an excellent amenity for the community. But there's still some opportunities to improve. So address some of those gaps, increase the connectivity, and really get people from where they are to where they want to go. And you know, related directly to that is a lack of safe infrastructure, and it's really limiting the number of active transportation users. So the crossings and on-street cycling facilities were identified as key priorities for us to look at as we move forward. And the final themes that I want to talk about here where the need to improve connectivity to key destinations. So connectivity just comes up time and time and time again when we're talking about what the priorities should be for this plan, and the opportunities to improve public spaces for active transportation users, especially in the downtown cores. And I think that one of the things that has been shown as some of the spaces that have previously been dedicated to cars in, during the pandemic, as some of the bump outs and sidewalk extensions and different things have moved forward, one of the things that that's really demonstrated is that when you reconsider how public space is used, particularly in your most vibrant area part of your community, especially in your downtown, when you start to rededicate some of that space to active transportation or to spaces for people, it provides vitality for that entire community. It really does provide benefits that reach beyond just providing some additional seating. It provides some vitality, it provides eyes on the street, and it provides a reason for people to stop and stay and linger and enjoy the downtowns of the city of Temiskaming Shores. So those are kind of the themes that we heard from the engagement. I just want to take a moment and just make sure there's no questions or any comments here before I move on and we start talking about the network. So I just want to take a pause because I've been talking. My computer tells me now for a good solid 18 minutes. So I'm just going to take a pause and see if anyone has any questions, comments, or anything that they'd like to ask before we move on to talking about the network. Just gonna have some water. Feel free to use the raise hand function and we can allow you to talk or pop your question in the chat or in the Q&A. But if there's no questions, then I can just move on and keep on talking. That's the way these virtual public sessions often work, isn't it? So moving on to talking a little bit about our active transportation network and the way that we've structured the network development process. So the way that we structured the network development process is based on Ontario-wide best practice. So, the recently released Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18 is the design guide for cycling facilities in Ontario. And I mean, not to like toot our horn too loudly, but I mean, we wrote the book. Like Dave was the lead for the team that put that document together. So there's very few people in the province that are more familiar with the recommendations from that document than the folks on our team. And so we're really looking at taking those recommendations from that guidebook and operationalizing them for the city of Temiskaming Shores. So the way that we have done that is through a 9-step process that relies on both technical work, evaluating the network from a technical standpoint, so looking at traffic volumes, looking at speed, looking at roadway width, and then also from a standpoint of engagement and talking to the community and trying to understand what the priorities are. So the first step of knowing where you want to go is, of course, knowing where you are. So the first step of our process is to identify existing conditions. And so when we looked at the existing conditions for the municipality, we saw that they have 43.5 kilometers of off-road multi-use paths. So that includes the Stato Trail, as well as the trails networks in Devil's Rock and Pete's Dam. They have about 0.1 kilometers of signed routes and Sharrows marking, and there's 36.5 kilometers of sidewalk throughout the city of Temiskaming Shores, primarily in New Liskeard, Haileybury, and North Cobalt. We have Diamond listed here, even though there are no sidewalks in Diamond, but we just wanted to highlight that we were also considering that, and it's in our recommendations. So we then moved on to our route selection criteria. So these will look a lot similar to the goals of the plan that I talked about earlier when I was talking about the vision and the objectives. And so our route selection criteria were based on consultation with stakeholders. And we identified things like safety, community connections, feasibility, servicing demand, connecting the Stato Trail, and providing scenic routes. So a lot of these were the criteria through which we were looking at the different routes and trying to understand where they should be prioritized, and even if they should be prioritized at all, given the feasibility, the cost, and the potential demands that they would be servicing. So once we had that done, then we went out and did both desktop and field investigations. So desktop investigations basically refers to us using Google Street View to kind of go around and take a look and see if we can get a bit of a flavor for the existing conditions. And then to supplement that, we went out and took more than 200 photos of different facilities and different conditions within the city of Timiskaming Shores. So we really covered the entire community, looking at, everywhere from Pete's Dam all the way down to Devil's Rock Park and everything in between. So, as we do that, we start to identify the different corridors that are going to form the backbone of the network for the active transportation plan. So the next step is to run through what we call facility confirmation. So using the existing information that we have in terms of traffic volume, in terms of speed limit, we plug them into these what are called nomographs. And the nomographs are essentially just a chart that tells you, based on how many vehicles a day are using that road and how fast those vehicles are going, what type of facility is most appropriate for that condition. So in this instance, we were primarily using the one on the right here. We were primarily using the urban/suburban context. There were a few instances where we would be using the rural context. Some of the, for example, Peters Road would be a good one. Drive-in Theater Road would be another one where we would probably look at that on the rural nomograph, as well as Stevenson Road as well, near the hospital. We were looking at those with the rural nomograph. So we'd be comparing those. But for the most part, we were looking at facilities that would lie on the urban and suburban nomograph. So the design principles as we go through were that we were looking to design for all ages and abilities. So, we looked at the existing facilities that are there, the number of off-use, multi-use trails, the number of different facilities that do accommodate, kind of higher comfort cycling and walking. And we wanted to make sure that the connections that we were feeding into those types of facilities met that same level of comfort. We wanted to look at how motor vehicle speed influences cyclist safety. So opportunities to reduce speed on some of the priority corridors should be explored, especially to facilitate more of those all ages and abilities type infrastructure. And then when in doubt, design for safety. So if we had a facility that was kind of on the border, if it was in that kind of liminal space between one facility treatment and another, we pretty much always went for the higher type of treatment. We always went for a higher degree of safety. We've been integrating complete streets planning and design. And what complete streets mean is that where possible, you try and design for as many different types of road users given the available right of way as you can. So we are looking at trying to accommodate pedestrians, cyclists, motor vehicle users all in the same corridor in a safe and effective way, given the motor vehicle volumes that we saw and the available right of way width. So we've really been trying to take that complete streets approach. And then providing equitable means of transportation. We do know that walking and cycling are highly cost-effective forms of transportation. So we want to make sure that we're providing space for people to use those to get around. And supporting economic development and tourism goals. People are flocking to communities where walking and cycling are a great way to get around. They're using those as a way of just designing where they're going to go for their next vacation. I think that we're all seeing the impact of the staycation here in Ontario, where people are traveling to places within the province and really enjoying the places that are relatively close to home. And a lot of those folks are getting out and walking and cycling and using that as the determining factor for where they're going to travel. I see that there's a couple messages in the chat here, so I'm actually just going to take a quick second There are, sorry, yes, Robert, there are some visual aspects of the plan coming here. I promise. Not only visual, but interactive. Even you get to play around with some of the maps and take a look, and you can zoom in and take a peek yourself. So let's get to the good stuff. Let's talk about the network. So what we have done as we've gone through this process is, we have really looked at the entirety of the community of Temiskaming Shores, and we've looked at the ways that we can better connect the existing facilities. So as I've outlined before, we've identified about 80 kilometers of existing facilities, so that being your off-road multi-use trails, as well as your sidewalks. And we have identified the need for about 58.6 kilometers of new facilities to supplement those existing facilities to provide a complete, connected, all ages and abilities network that reaches all the way across the city. The connections that are going to be made here are really going to connect every single part of the city to every single other part, and we're really excited that this type of network, it's pretty infrequent that when we come into a community and we do a project and we achieve the kind of connectivity that we're talking about, it's pretty infrequent that you would see the number of proposed kilometers be so much lower than the number of existing kilometers. I would say that it is a rarity for these types of plans. So now we're going to take a minute and we're going to go over, and I just want to take us over to to a tool called Miro. So I'm going to put a direct link in the chat. If you just want to click on it, you can. Okay, apparently my computer decided that it did not want to copy the URL, so I will have to redo that. Give me 1 second here. And so the reason we're using Miro, and the reason that I'm showing you this one, is that this provides you with, so if you go into the chat, you can find it, or if you use the link there, and I will note for those that are watching the recording, the URL is case sensitive. So no capital T on Temiskaming, but you do have to capitalize ATP. So it is case sensitive. And so if you use that, you will be able to navigate to the Miro board. So the Miro board is a tool that allows you to take a look, and I'll share my screen so that folks can see what it looks like. Give me 1 second here. So the Miro board, Matt, can you see my Miro? Yeah.
Yep, I can see it.
Perfect. Okay. So the Miro tool is essentially an online virtual whiteboard, and what it allows you to do is it allows you to zoom in. And we've put all the maps up here. So the cycling network is the facility type, and then the proposed phasing. So the facility type is up here on the top, and then the proposed phasing is down here, highlighting the short and longer term priorities. And then over here is the new proposed sidewalks and trails. And so we've got those broken down by New Liskeard and Diamond, and then Hallaberry over here. And so you'll see where we're proposing new sidewalks and trails, so new walking facilities as well. And so what you can do using the Miro tool is when you come in, you'll see that you should be able to use these comment tools here. And so on the left toolbar here, you'll see a little speech bubble that says comment, and you can just click on that and you can drag the comment to wherever you want it to go and drop it, and then you can type your comment. So I am definitely a dog person, so I'm going to comment dogs there. And so you can comment on any of these maps and let us know what you think, what's kind of good, what's potentially problematic, what things we need to watch out for. as these elements get implemented. So we're going to leave this live for, this should be locked, yeah? I think it's locked. So we're gonna leave this live for the next 2 weeks for residents to be able to provide their feedback as we move towards finalization. So you can provide your comments, you could share this out to your network, and we will absolutely be looking for your feedback on this on these components. But we think that we've identified a pretty reasonable and a pretty effective network for the city of Temiskaming Shores. So I'm going to pause the recording for a moment, and we'll just take a minute and let everyone explore the mural boards for a couple minutes, and then we're going to move on. We'll have a couple more pieces of the network. So we're going to talk about some of the design. We're going to talk about some of the trails, but I just want to give everyone a minute to look at and digest some of these, some of the maps that we've posted here, because I know it's a lot of information. So I'm just going to pause the recording now. So we're back recording. Just for those who are following along on the recording, we did have a brief discussion about potentially adjusting a crossing from Cecil and Rourke down to View and Rourke. We also talked about prioritizing the sidewalks along Rourke Street, and that was kind of our primary discussion that we led there. So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the other elements of the plan. So this will definitely be the one that will likely get the most conversation going. We are suggesting, in particular, based on the feedback that we've received, we're suggesting the addition of buffered bike lanes on Whitewood Avenue, and we're suggesting the addition of additional pedestrian and kind of amenity zones on Ferguson Avenue in Hallaberry. So based on our assessment of Whitewood Avenue, what we've seen is that the roadway is wide enough to accommodate protected or bollard separated bike lanes on both sides of the road, and have parking still be maintained on one side of the road. So what we would recommend is that on one side of the road, there be a parking protected bike lane. So the parking would actually be, as you can see on the right here, the parking would actually be away from the curb, but adjacent to the bike lane. So that differs from probably what you may think of sometimes, where you have seen potentially in other communities where you've seen a bike lane on the kind of on the other side of the vehicles, where you'd see the bike lane over here on the driver's side. The reason that parking protected bike lanes are gaining popularity is that every car has a driver, and that means that every car has a door that's potentially going to open and expose a person on a bike to risk. Not every car has a passenger, and in fact, most cars don't have a passenger. And what we also know from analyzing collision data is that when a car door opens and the person on a bike is adjacent to moving vehicle traffic, the most significant place where that they get injured is when they fall into the moving vehicle lane. It's not the collision with the person opening the door that causes the severe injury and death. It's the collision with the other cars that are driving by them. And so while obviously no one wants to be thinking about the potential for collisions, a collision with an opening door on a passenger side where the person gets knocked into the sidewalk or onto the asphalt is a better outcome than getting knocked into the path of moving vehicles. And so that's why the parking protected bike lane is a preferred design. In downtown Hallaberry on Ferguson, we've really focused on trying to calm traffic, to slow down vehicles moving through that corridor, and to prioritize the creation of an environment that is more conducive to those kind of sit and stay and linger moments. So to really create a place where people feel welcome. As it exists right now, there is no requirement for anyone to stop all the way from, if you're driving north and you're trying to get to New Liskeard, there's no requirement for you to stop from the far south end of Hallaberry all the way through downtown, which includes the right turn channel at Main and Rourke, to the no stop control left turn lane across at Main Ferguson, all the way through downtown Hallaberry, and then all the way into New Liskeard. The fact that there's absolutely no stop control through that corridor suggests to us that the vehicle movement is being prioritized much too much, especially in a downtown area where the priority should be people. It should be places to linger and stay and stop and enjoy, especially as new businesses open up in downtown Hallaberry. So those are kind of the two big transformations that I'm sure are going to garner a lot of conversation within the community, but they are definitely the ones that we see as the most important for connecting the network. Especially Whitewood, there's really no alternative east-west through New Liskeard to Whitewood, especially when you're thinking about trying to build connections out to the to Pete's Dam. I will take a moment here, Michael. I'll unmute you here, and if you have a question, then we're happy to hear it. Go ahead. You should be able to unmute.
All righty. Thank you very much. I was just going to ask you about the timeline of this project as far as winter versus summer, spring. Is this 12 months a year, or is this just for 7 months while we have our winter over 5 months?
So we are recommending, especially for some of these priority corridors, like, for example, like Whitewood, that winter maintenance be piloted for at least the first couple of years. And the reason behind that is that it sends mixed signals to install and pull up, especially if you're doing painted buffers and all of the other different things, especially if you're trying to facilitate parking away from the curb like this. The way that you're going to want to likely provide that delineation is going to be through the use of things like precast pinned curbs. So like the Jersey barriers, things you'd see in like kind of a parking lot with the bollards on it. And then our recommendation would be that a sidewalk plow just kind of go down, do a path down that on either direction, and try and maintain that lane clear and see how it ends up working in terms of that priority winter maintenance. We recognize that winter maintenance in the Ontario context does need to be a bit of an iterative approach. You need to take a look at it from the perspective of what can we maintain versus what's the cost effectiveness of it. So, I think a great example would be the city of Ottawa, where, several years ago, they started with a priority winter maintenance network of about 40 kilometers. I mean, this is, in a city with almost 1,000 kilometers of cycling infrastructure. And they focused on that 40 kilometers, providing a really great user experience on those 40 kilometers. And then they just started to expand it outwards as the ridership through the winter started to grow. I always use I know I always hear the concern about winter cycling, and I have kind of a general response, which is how many people would drive like a two-wheel drive Honda Civic if the roads were never plowed in the winter? It would be time to, put the summer car away and get the winter car out, right? The tank. But I think that in some instances, when we see communities where people say, oh, no one rides in the winter, the question that I always ask is, have you tried making it safe and comfortable for them to do so ever? And oftentimes, every time, the answer is no. And so we recommend that it be tried as a pilot, obviously, within the realm of feasibility for the city. We do recognize that, this is going to be adding additional operational expense to the city. But we recommend that they give it a try. And we are recommending both of these projects in Whitewood and Ferguson. We're recommending those in the short-term phasing in the 0 to 5 year projects.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to continue on to the other part that's likely going to generate some conversation. Matt, you got something to say? You look like you're.
Well, we just had a couple questions come in the chat.
Oh, sure.
I'll grab those first, maybe.
Mm-hmm. So how will the plan take the condition of existing sidewalks into consideration? For example, there's a sidewalk marked on the maps on Browning between Georgina and 11B, but the condition of sidewalk is quite bad. So we definitely did not have the time and available scope to go out and do a full sidewalk conditions assessment. We did hear through our consultation that the existing conditions of the sidewalks in the community are quite poor. And so our recommendation, one of the policy recommendations that I think is going to end up being would be a sidewalk facilities assessment. So to really look at the way that the sidewalks have been prioritized and start to look at how those can be revitalized as the city continues. So I see, should they make it safer for walkers in the winter before they try to plow for bikes? I think that it is definitely I think it's definitely not an either or. We think it's a both and discussion when it comes to maintaining more effectively in the winter. We would really prefer not to see it come down to an argument about whether or not cycling facilities should be maintained in the winter when sidewalk facilities are not. I think that the recommendations in this program are largely going to result in, I mean, if I'm being fully transparent, like there is likely going to be the need for additional operations budget, whether that includes additional staff or additional equipment. And that additional staff and equipment is going to be able to be used to ensure that the active transportation network across the city, whether it's for people walking or for people cycling, is better maintained throughout all seasons. So we definitely see it as a both and rather than an either or type of discussion. So we want to see it be well maintained for people walking and for people cycling. And I think that that's really important. Would a stop sign help the speed at the bottom of Main? So at Main and Ferguson, we are recommending crossing enhancements. So we are recommending a stop controlled intersection there to slow vehicles down. Okay.
Elisa, I think, had her hand up too.
Yeah, Alyssa, do you have your hand up there?
Reply.
Yeah, in regards to the snowplow, is that actually going to be part of the recommendation? There's days, like I said, my kids go to the school in Haileybury, that the sidewalks are impassable and we have to walk down the middle of the street. So to me, this plowing of a bike lane would really tick me off if my kids could not get to school, because that's being done before the sidewalks are being done.
So I don't think that anyone, I don't think that anyone is suggesting that that the particular facilities in New Liskeard would be a higher priority for winter maintenance than the sidewalks in Haileybury, particularly the sidewalks near a school. I'm assuming, based on the geography of Temiskaming Shores, that there are probably separate maintenance crews for Haileybury and New Liskeard. I'm assuming that the snowplow operators, especially sidewalk plow operators, are probably not driving between Haileybury and New Liskeard. So I think that we'd be talking about two kind of separate pools of maintenance crews. But I think there's definitely a lot to look into as we move forward on the implementation chapter for this, Alyssa, especially about you know, how the city is maintaining its existing infrastructure and what type of priority you know, those corridors get. I know one of the pieces that we heard in particular in regards to Rourke is that the sidewalk plow will come along and do the sidewalk, and then the road plow comes and then the sidewalk is just covered in all the stuff that was plowed off the road, and then it's essentially impassable. So even though the road was, or the sidewalk was, you know, ostensibly plowed earlier in the day, that doesn't really much matter when all the snow that has accumulated on the road is then pushed on to the sidewalk, making it impassable. So there's definitely there's a need to better coordinate those kinds of things, but I would say that those types of policy discussions are something that we can recommend at a master planning level, but they're certainly not the type of, and I know this is an unsatisfactory answer, but they're not the type of kind of nitty-gritty detail that we get into at the master planning level. But it is a recommendation that we can certainly put forward in terms of a policy review, that we can recommend the types of policies that can be analyzed as the plan goes forward. In terms of the parking spaces, that's a good question. We haven't done a full analysis of the number of parking spaces. In terms of Hallaberry, it would be minimal. We'd really be just looking at curb extensions and some of the really just near the intersections that we would be extending those curbs and trying to do slowdown. So in Hallaberry, it would be a fairly minimal number. New Liskeard would be a slightly larger number of parking spaces that would be lost. However, due to the size of the off-street parking lots that are available in downtown New Liskeard, with the giant Tiger lot, as well as the lots on the north side of Whitewood, particularly just to the west of downtown. When you look at the broader parking availability within that kind of 500-meter circle of downtown, the percentage of parking spots that we would be talking about losing would be well under 1%. So it's a really small number in the broad context of the number of parking spots.
Just for everyone, because that question was just sent to us as hosts and panelists, it was just regards to how many parking spaces would be lost with these changes that were implemented. So like Justin was saying, there's a number of parking spaces that aren't necessarily right on the street. And in total, the total number is still going to be quite high for the number of people who are going to be entering and coming to these destinations.
And I see another question that's, could the bike lane follow the lake, take the lakeway? That there is no, and I think that, going to the maps, I think probably is the best demonstration of this. There's no east-west connection. There's no alternative to Whitewood to move between the east side of town and the west side of town. So while we are recommending that the cycling facilities along the lake be upgraded and improved, the alternatives to Whitewood are really just not there. We tried to look at the Broadwood or Broadview, I can never remember. Broadwood, yeah. And the slope of the kind of connection between the two segments of Broadwood was just too great for us to be able to recommend a cycling facility there. And so, it really only left us with Whitewood. But anyways, I would like to move on because we've got our fantastic trails lead. Oh, Amanda, are you still? Yes, you're still here. Okay, good. I just can't see you on my screen.
Have not lost me yet.
Good. Okay. Well, we're gonna move on, and we're gonna let our fantastic trails lead tell you all about the recommendations that we are making for the trail infrastructure and amenities within the community. So Amanda, take it away, and I'll just advance the slides for
Wonderful.
you as you need.
Perfect. So just looking at some of the key trail infrastructure and amenities, infrastructure amenities will help define the quality of the trail network and will support removing barriers to participation, elevate safety, and promote healthy community engagement. Very important, consistency, multifunctional, and sustainability are the key factors we applied to the recommendations for infrastructure and amenity enhancements. We're not looking to overburden the system. We're looking for to purposely place and recommend things that will improve the quality of the system. So some of these elements include end of trip facilities, so clearly defined parking and locations of appropriate parking, waste recycling, dog waste receptacles, where appropriate, regulatory signage and mapping. So keep users on the trail, following the trail specific guidelines, because each area will have its own rules and requirements. Accessibility information, seating, emergency contacts, shelters becoming more and more important in our trail systems, and information and networking opportunities. Sharing and learning signage, so opportunities for user guidance, sharing stories, honoring people and events, educational opportunities, linking people to a network and recreation opportunities outside of just the trail system, and also branding and marketing opportunities within the trail network. So where can people go with a different range, abilities, ages, and desired challenges? There's so many unique trail systems within this facility with such different experiences. So sharing that information to get people where they want to be.
I'm working on it.
Okay, no problem. So in addition to the public-facing infrastructure, there are a list of recommendations that will help maintenance and operations of the trail as well, and things that will start to foster efficiencies and offer opportunities to be more responsive with some of the maintenance rather than regular inspections and working off of catching things at regular intervals. Besides those elements, the additional sort of public-facing aspects that we're looking at, rest and refuge. So we have recommendations for formal and informal seating nodes, especially at about approximately 200-meter intervals and at vistas. Informal seating, so rocks at greater intervals along steep slopes to aid accessibility. We know it's really important for people to feel that they're able to use a trail to have those moments where they can pause. Shelters to offer respites from sun, wind, and rain, and a place to muster. Lit trail sections or lit refuge points where evening use is encouraged or desired. Maintenance and mobility, bike repair stations are a really important aspect, especially on some of the more rugged trails that you have where incidences can occur. Looking at the potential as the interest grows for e-bike charging stations and to support those power aided users, and even USB and other plugs and even Wi-Fi where appropriate to capture the interest of kind of some of those more tech crazed users, the people we can't get out to be fit, thinking about alternative ways that we can interest them in coming onto the trail. Safety and accessibility, so important. Wilderness trails, they can conform to some accessibility standards and still maintain their character and opportunities for challenge. We don't need to flatten them out. We can reduce some uneven surfaces and slopes where possible, but really provide supportive amenities and enable users with tools to be able to make this more an inclusive, safe trail system. So some of those tools that we're recommending include minor grading improvements to surfacing and trying to divert the drainage so they're not coming down the trail and continuing to rut away that trail surfacing. Infill surfacing to elevate and smooth the trails, especially on those places that are quite rocky. Like if you look at some of the more wilderness trails that you have railings, bike access ramps, and landing brakes within some of those steep slopes, and also some seats along those. So if someone is challenged going up those more tricky areas, that they can have a rest at the top and bottom. Signage to communicate the specific challenges. Very important in terms of accessibility that we communicate elevation gain, where those challenges are so people can choose to avoid them, what types of challenges those are. So really describing those so users can come to the trail, understand where those are, and then hopefully open up the doors that they'll be able to use the trail more because they can pick those challenges. Barrier railings are important to keep users safe, and with smart design, they don't need to hinder the views. Options for materials and design features will help to build both your trail brand and entice users to a destination so that they can be an asset. The safety, although barriers are for safety, they can be a tool for placemaking and interpretive signage. I know the last time I was at this location, there was still a fence there, but you know, that could be a pretty scary place to go up to Devil's Rock and stand there and looking out, and some of those some infrastructure bringing in some of those safety barriers can bring people up to the spaces, and also opportunity to bring some of that interpretive information and create a safer space overall. So then just some images and some examples of different types of materials that we can use to create those different looks and feels for those types of infrastructure. And then just addressing problem areas. So we want to establish sustainable trail design and minimize the maintenance, reducing those liability risks and improving the user experience. Mitigating those reoccurring issues through limiting and avoiding adverse impacts. So thinking about Pete's Dam, you know, someone mentioned maintenance programs and what are we going to do? We're making recommendations to talk about changing those trails facilities so there's not those continued washouts, there's not trails underwater as often, understanding that will happen. So looking at structure design, so elevating the trails in low areas where we can, utilizing retaining stones and culverts to convey that water when it does move underneath. Reinforcing the trail surfacing with geogrid cells that to manage erosion and create sustainable trail use. There's some really great products that even when underwater soaked, you can still wheel across that trail surface, and it really holds it in place. So that way, when the water does finally recede, you still have your trail system in place and it's usable before. Whereas right now, there's a lot of trails that do wash out and they create big ruts, and they're really hard to use after that water recedes. And then looking at installing structures when we've got a problem that constantly washes out, you know, we do need to look at whether a small pedestrian bridge is really the answer, or a boardwalk system that is going to be give it a little bit more longevity, so we're not always coming back, maintaining those trail sections, or concerned about safety on those areas. In that same vein, trail alignment. So taking some of those trails that are a big problem and rerouting them to less problematic areas. Looking at, instead of having the trails along the waterway the entire way, maybe we divert them and bring them out at specific vista points, trying to pull the trail away from those flood points and those sensitive banks and slopes. And then reducing conflicts with user types and vehicles with adequate size trails, as well as separated facilities.
Amanda, can we just take
Yeah.
a second? Can you just tell us a little bit about what the GeoGrid and cell
Sure.
would look
Yeah.
like?
Is essentially, there's a few different products out there, but it essentially looks like a 3 or 4 inch milk crate with a crisscross grid within it, clips together. So it's rigid, it clips together, it stakes down, and it's something that can be infilled with mulch, earthen surface, or limestone screenings. And ideally, though, you know, when say Pete's Dam, when it floods over, even if it takes away all of the earth or the limestone screenings that are in that trail surfacing, you can still walk on it, you can still ride on it. Some really great products, and it still has that flexibility that as the ground erodes underneath or shifts, it'll just shift with that. And as I said, there's a few different products in the market with different depths and different thicknesses, but really fantastic solution that we're starting to make use of more and more in those problem areas, because it can withstand flooding over top. And it's not like a boardwalk system that's more expensive to install and can get rather damaged by ice flow. Some of these geogrids are really tough, and that's what makes them really appealing. Better than the carpet, for sure. And then there's the use of structures, more expensive for sure, but sometimes it really is the better solution. And even, boardwalks are great as well, but sometimes you just need to span a space with a bridge. If you're always coming back to it, maintaining it, and you're having washouts, or if you're really worried about that natural heritage systems and the ecology of a landscape, sometimes some of these prefabricated structures are the way to go. And a lot less maintenance, and can really facilitate a lot of user types and vehicle loads and other things. Boardwalks are also fantastic. Some image examples there of some boardwalks, and you do have a lot of boardwalks throughout your system. So, a little more maintenance, but a very beautiful experience when you're using them. And the other ramps is something that, we do really want to avoid stairs when we can. It's not always an option. Totally understand, but anywhere we can introduce a ramp or change the slope, it's fantastic tool.
Sorry.
You go ahead. No, it's okay.
Sorry.
And then I guess, the other applications, some of these larger bridges. So if we do want to span larger waterways, even the prefabricated bridges are really cost efficient to span larger waterways. And these are just a few examples of some of the bridges and boardwalks that we've done.
Thanks, Amanda.
Mhm.
And actually, speaking of waterways, I realized that I got so distracted by all the amazing questions and comments that I didn't talk about the Wabi River crossing.
I wondered when you said it was my turn, but I was going to just let you go.
I'm gonna go back.
I don't know if there's any questions that
There was a question.
there was one. I thought I was just trying to catch it out of the corner of my eye here.
Yeah, there was a question about are we recommending that Temiskaming Shores maintain the trail systems? And I think that the answer to that is yes. We're recommending that the city be take a more active role in maintaining and supporting the trail systems within the municipality.
And some, some different leveraging technology for some of that reporting is really helping some communities to enable users and volunteers to report information in and then deploy resources strategically. So that way, there's a lot of trails we can't have staff necessarily patrolling them or monitoring them on a regular basis, although that should be done as well. But getting the community to help report those trail systems in and having a dashboard system to really sort that information and deploy resources to certain areas can be really helpful to maximizing efficiencies in terms of that maintenance resource dollars that are always sparse.
Great. So before I get to any of the other comments, I do, because I don't want to skip over it twice, because I think it's fairly pivotal. Is I wanted to talk a little bit about the Wabi Bridge. So we also recognize that the Armstrong Street Bridge is a major barrier to the Stato Trail. It is one of the pinch points in the network that really does kind of that really does create a gap along the Stato Trail. So really a bit of a disconnect between the solid all ages and abilities facilities to the south and to the north. And so one of the things that we did was we looked at it and we looked at how we could potentially create a safer condition for that corridor. And based on the available information about traffic volumes, our recommendation for the short term is to provide a two-way protected facility along the east side of the Armstrong Street Bridge from Sharp to Elm. So it'd be a relatively short stretch that wouldn't cross any intersections, and it would just provide that protected facility for people moving north and south along the Stato Trail to continue along their way without necessarily having to interact with mixed traffic. Based on the available traffic volumes and the data that we've seen, the Armstrong Street Bridge would still operate at a completely acceptable level of service. And we think that this is a really effective solution in the short term. Our longer term recommendation would certainly be that, if there are bike lanes added to Armstrong Street south of the bridge, that unidirectional bike lanes on either side of the street be added, on either side of the bridge be added to provide that continuity. But in the time when that is not the reality, our recommendation would be that we create some turning facilities here. So a two-stage turn box at Elm and Armstrong, and then a queuing area at Armstrong and Sharp, so that if people do want to go and head south on Armstrong so they can connect to Church, it provides them just a little bit of a space to wait. It would be protected by again, a concrete curb and bollards. But then if they do want to continue on Sharp and get down to the Stato Trail, then that provides them that opportunity as well. So I did want to make sure that I got to that, because we spent a lot of time on that. So wanted to make sure that we gave it the due. There is a question, and are there recommendations to make the Stato Trail that connects Halberry and New Liskeard safer, for example, with barriers or reduced speeds? Certainly one of the pieces that we are going to put forward in terms of the implementation would be the consideration that the speed limit on Lakeshore be lowered to 60 kilometers an hour to provide that safer route. That's obviously something that would need to be considered in the broader transportation goals. But we do really see the fact that the Highway 11 bypass has been constructed, it's fully operational. We would like to see Lakeshore start to be considered as not just a highway alternative. We'd like to see it start to be considered as a place that can be a real destination corridor, a place that can be like the scenic route, a place that can be the place where people can walk or bike, whether it's with their kids or with their parents riding e-bikes. We'd love to see that type of marquee corridor. And we know that that can't necessarily happen next to 90-kilometer-an-hour traffic. It really just does not create the conditions where people feel safe and comfortable. And given the available, given the lake view, it's just such a beautiful God. So for those of you that don't know, I used to work for a nonprofit. I'm going to get a little personal here. I used to work for a nonprofit, and one of the things that I really started to do was look at how I could support different municipalities with more like in-depth workshops. And the first place that hired me to come and do a workshop that totally took a chance on me was a community that I had never heard of, which was the city of Temiskaming Shores. This was back in 2015. And I came up to Temiskaming Shores, and I was fortunate enough to be toured around by some absolutely fantastic people, including Amanda, not Amanda on our team, but some really fantastic people who took me around. And I honestly, I really do have a big soft spot in my heart for the community. I've been working with the city. Good find out to join us. We live in Collingwood. My lovely wife would probably not take too kindly to us moving, but it's really wonderful for me to be able to be working with the city of Temiskaming Shores. And the thing that made me like really fall head over heels with that city was that view. There was kind of a pull off. I remember it. There's like a little pull off on the Stato Trail as you're riding along Lakeshore, and you just get the view over Lake Temiskaming, and you can see Devil's Rock to the south, and you can see the like lights of New Liskeard to the north. And it just like struck me as this absolutely incredible juxtaposition of like that, all that like makes Canada in all those like very stereotypical ways, like rocks and trees and water, but then also all the urbanity and the amenities that like folks in my generation really do love. So all that to say, I hope that Lakeshore can become the kind of place where more people can fall in love with Temiskaming Shores the way that I did. And I cannot wait to get back up there. I really cannot. It's one of the first places that I hope to travel when my kids are old enough to do the bike ride between Halberry and New Liskeard. We're gonna head on up there and we're gonna do that ride. Anyways, sorry, enough getting sentimental there. So I do want to continue on, and I now, now from all that to the cold hard numbers. So we're going to get into some of the costing here, and I wanted to just highlight what we're looking at here. So when it comes to the short-term priorities, the short-term network, which is 0 to 5 year, we have phased about 19 kilometers in the short term at the cost of about $1.18 million. So this includes design costs, and it also includes some contingency costs. So we're trying to make sure that we're being very conservative with our numbers. We would rather overestimate the costs than underestimate them. We'd rather you guys expect more and then have it come in under budget than you guys go in and have someone say, oh well, there's design or these materials have gone up or whatever. The exciting thing about this number is that when it comes to the broader context of municipal capital spend and the amount of connectivity and infrastructure that this builds, this is a really tremendously low number to really connect the entire urban area of Temiskaming Shores. And I just think that it's really exciting for a city like Temiskaming Shores to be able to build a complete connected network within all of their urban areas for about a $1 million price tag, especially in the environment where we are seeing different funding streams come out from different levels of government to support exactly these kinds of investments. And I want to make sure that I preface that, because before I move on to the longer term, which is a much higher price tag, I want to make sure that I'm prefacing that by saying that the prices that you're seeing here, we're not saying like, oh, and I'll just move on to it because, let's get to the big number here. I'm not saying when we look at the longer term, we're looking at about a $14.6 million investment. And what we're not saying here is to say that $14.6 million needs to be carried by the residents of the city of Temiskaming Shores. What we are saying is that $14.6 million is a number of different grants and programs and transfer payments that the city of Temiskaming Shores should be seeking to be able to fund these kinds of investments in the long term. So, we see this as a 20-year plan. And so when you compare the number of different projects and proposals that we're putting on the table here to the amount of transfer payments that the city receives from the province and the amount of funding that's available from both the federal and provincial governments to support these types of investments, we do see this as an achievable plan in the 20-year timeline. We see the 5-year timeline as an extremely achievable plan, and we think that it is certainly something that the city could hang their hat on in terms of saying that they now have a full all ages and abilities set of infrastructure within their community. I want to highlight within this rather large number, the biggest number here is sidewalks at $5.4 million. And I think what this largely reflects is a backlog of sidewalk construction that has not happened in the city of Temiskaming Shores for a long time. So there is definitely a need to start to consider how the city builds for accessibility and for walking. And that is going to have costs, but we definitely see that there is the potential to reduce those costs by folding them in with capital construction costs, particularly as some of your some 1960s and 1970s subdivisions start to come up for reconstruction and redevelopment, because those roads and the infrastructure underneath them is going to start to require reconstruction, which is definitely going to be an important part moving forward. So after all that, I want to just quickly talk before we wrap up here this evening, because I do want to try and wrap up by 8:30, if that's even a remote possibility. I don't have it's 8:24, so I have 6 minutes. I think I should be able to do it. So I want to talk about the programming recommendations that we're putting forward. So as I've mentioned, earlier, if you still remember way back then at the start of the meeting, we have been trying to develop a plan that meets the needs not only for the physical infrastructure of the community, but also the social infrastructure. And so we are recommending a series of different programs that are going to help to build the culture of active transportation within the city of Timiskaming Shores. And we are recommending that based on 3 different phases. So we're essentially kind of recommending that the city start small and work its way up to develop new programs and new ways of promoting active transportation. So the foundations are kind of like step 1. The basic programming would be like step 2 once you've completed all the elements of the foundation, and then the advanced programming would be in step 3, and that would be a few years down the road when you have that more established culture of active transportation and you can move forward. So let's talk a little bit about it. So the foundation. So this would be step 1. The pieces that we're looking at would be establishing a community slow roll. So in addition to the amazing events that Bike Timiskaming Shores does, where they're kind of doing longer rides, we'd love to see more short, family focused, leave no rider behind, kind of everyday rider type pace rides to really connect with different community amenities. We'd like to see every school in Timiskaming Shores be participating in the Active School Travel Program, looking at how they can make it safer and then more accessible for kids to walk and bike to school. We'd like to see open streets events taking place within the city of Timiskaming Shores, potentially on the same day, one in Hallaberry, one in New Liskeard, and then use the Lakeshore connection to get all the way across to those 2 anchor points. Wayfinding signs and maps can be a really effective way of promoting cultural change and promoting folks to think differently about their transportation. If they're seeing signs every day, it's kind of like the background noise of considering how you shift your transportation behaviors. We'd like to see the Bike Friendly Communities Committee that exists within the city of Timiskaming Shores transition over to an active transportation advisory committee. This speaks largely to the fact that we feel that walking has definitely taken a back seat within the city, and we'd like to see more of an advisory role focused on how to revitalize the pedestrian infrastructure of the city and how to move forward with new pedestrian activities to support the city as they move forward with reconstructing those sidewalks and starting to build more walkability into everything they do. And then support for marginalized communities. I think that the Bike Exchange has proven to be a tremendously successful program within the city of Timiskaming Shores. And I think that looking at how the Bike Exchange can start to serve marginalized communities through whether it's through connecting with different service delivery agencies within Timiskaming Shores to provide bikes so that it doesn't have to be a show up on that day and get a bike, but it can be a needs-based program as well, I think would be a really wonderful thing to see moving forward. And especially if you can connect that up to providing people with the necessary skills to ride their bike safely and also to repair their bike if it breaks down, because sometimes, a broken chain can mean the difference between getting to work and not getting to work if that's your only form of transportation. But if you have that skill set to be able to maintain that chain, to change that tube on your bike, that can make the difference between you being at work and you not making it. So once those foundations have been achieved, we would recommend that the city start to focus in a more specific way on exactly what we've talked about earlier, the winter cycling programs. So a winter wheels program is something that's been developed in the city of Peterborough, and we would love to see it be brought to the city of Timiskaming Shores. What it does is it provides support for people who would like to ride through the winter. So it's an application-based process, and so people apply to be part of the program. They get studded winter tires, additional equipment, whether it's gloves or panniers or fenders or whatever they need to make their bike rideable in the winter. And in exchange, they tell their stories and they humanize the experience of winter cycling, and they talk about it and they promote it to their friends and family, and they tell them that it's actually not that hard. Obviously, you don't have to ride every single day. We all realize that there are some days that are just not rideable. Those days when we get like the 2-foot snow lake effect snow dump. But those are the days that you probably shouldn't be driving either. So those are the days that you just stay at home. And so we encourage folks to, ride on the beautiful days. A 1 meter safe passing public awareness campaign. You can look to what other communities have done. Again, I'm going to go back to Peterborough here. Their A Meter Matters campaign. If you get a chance, I really recommend checking that out. It's a great advertisement, and it definitely hits different in the COVID era. The idea of random strangers getting way too close to you just feels extra uncomfortable. Taking education about active transportation to where people already are. So working with large employers, bringing some workshops within them. Looking at e-bike loan service or even an e-bike share. The municipality of Manitoulin Island recently rolled out a 20 e-bikes program. So, I think that there's a growing awareness of the benefit of these vehicles. I think anyone that hasn't ridden an e-bike, it's really hard to understand the transformative power of an e-bike until you put a foot on the pedal of these things. It is really outstanding the way that it just feels like you're riding with a really awesome wind at your back. And the more that people can experience that, the more that they are going to take off, and people are going to realize the transformative power of that technology. Looking at a community cycling challenge and connecting people with a kind of a collective goal, whether that's riding, one example was the city of Halton, or the town of Halton Hills, where they set a goal to ride to the moon and back as a community, which is a pretty interesting goal. And once they achieved that goal, they unlocked $50,000 in funding that had been donated from the Canadian Tire Foundation to their local hospice. And then building up more amenity hubs. So, whether it's at your local libraries or along the Stato Trail, looking at those kind of amenities like Amanda was talking about. And then once you get into the advanced programming, maybe scaling up the bike exchange to an Earn a Bike repair program, partnering with the local high school, providing some volunteer hours and some opportunities for high school students to connect with cycling. Looking at providing bike valet at community events. Bike valet is kind of like a coat check for your bike. It allows you to show up with your bike at a staffed, secure location. It gets checked in, and then at the end of the event, you give them your tag back, you grab your bike, away you go. It's a really highly visible way of showing support for active transportation. And it would be a great thing to run at your, for example, at your farmer's market every week. Really focusing on monitoring and evaluation, reporting and accountability, I think is key when we're talking about the kinds of investments that we're talking about with this active transportation plan. Reporting on how those investments are benefiting the community, how they're changing, how people are getting around, I think is absolutely vital. Looking at doing some bike equipment and trail equipment giveaways. So whether it's lights or bells or water bottles, just getting out there and connecting with people. And then finally, expanding the opportunity for kids to take bike rodeos, even if that's, and in some instances, as you can see with this picture here, sort of, the kids here are all riding the same bike and all riding with the same helmet. Those are things that are brought to the school so that you don't have to have your own bike to participate in the bike rodeo. You can still learn bike handling skills, even if you don't have a bike of your own to bring to school, which is great if you have a lot of kids that are getting bused to school, so that they don't have to bring their bike on the bus or try and figure out the logistics of getting their bike to school. So those are kind of the programming recommendations that are going to feed into the plan. So I'm going to wrap up here, and I just want to talk quickly about the different sources of funding and the way that we would be looking at how the infrastructure can be built. And as I've mentioned, and I'm not going to belabor this point because I've already talked about it, that the internal funding sources are definitely one way of doing it. So funding it through capital improvements, whether that's in conjunction with road reconstruction, like we're recommending, for example, for Rourke, that would be a simple line painting exercise that would happen with reconstruction on that corridor. But then also looking at the potential of development funds or development charges within the city to start to recoup some of the costs associated with growth and maintenance of the infrastructure that's required. And then also looking at external funding sources. So the federal government has recently announced a $400 million active transportation fund we would recommend that the city begin to apply for that, especially to fund the 0 to 5 year priorities. Those are exactly the kinds of things that are going to want to be funded. Looking at funding partnerships with adjacent municipalities, especially for some of these kind of connecting links that are going to connect to the communities, and then looking at some of the other funding sources that the city has accessed before, such as the Trillium Fund, FedNor funding, and the Green Infrastructure Fund. So we've talked a little bit about how we want to hear from you, but we'll leave the Miro tool open. And other than that, I recognize that it's already past 8:30. I thought I would be able to do it, but obviously I was horribly wrong. And so I just want to open it up for questions and see if anyone has anything that they'd like me to go back to or clarify or anything like that. But as we go into that part of the evening, I want to just say a sincere thank you for all of you setting aside over an hour and a half of your Thursday evening to sit around and listen to what a lot of people would think is super nerdy stuff, but I think we all recognize is tremendously important. And I'm just so grateful for all of the wonderful feedback that we've received this evening. I think it's going to make the plan better, and I'm really excited to see this plan move forward and to see the city of Temiskaming Shores really continue to define itself as a leader in Northern Ontario when it comes to active transportation. Okay, so I'll hold on for a few minutes, but in the meantime, I guess I'll throw it over to, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have anything that we didn't get to this evening that pops into your head, you can email myself or you can email Matt and he can forward it to me. We are super happy to see this project coming to its conclusion. We're really excited about it. I think our entire team is excited about the feasibility and about the energy around this in Temiskaming Shores. So yeah, that's how I'll close it off, and I'll throw it over to Matt to close us off.
Yeah, so not everyone was speaking up at once, so I figured I might as well say something. But perhaps what you could do too, though, is put that Miro link back in the chat, just so everyone has another chance to open it up and save it for later. But yeah, thanks for everything you've done, Justin, and your team, and getting us to this point of the planning process. It was certainly really interesting to go through the entirety of the startup meetings, through the planning processes, and talking about the conclusions that you guys have brought forward and drawn for us. Interesting discussions throughout about certain topics that came up. Very technical in nature too. I mean, we talked a lot about downtown Hilleberg, for example, at one of our stakeholder meetings, in just regards to how that grading works in regards to what we would potentially be doing there, and having the expertise available for that is certainly given us the confidence that this is we're moving in the right direction and this is going to be a good thing for everyone. So again, thank you for that for sure. And besides that, look forward to presenting again, I guess, to council in a couple weeks' time. Yeah.
I did get a question in the chat, Matt, and I breezed through it because if you don't want to stick around for this kind of very nerdy stuff, I fully understand. One of the questions was, do you think that we have the financial resources to do all or a part of what this project encompasses? And my answer is a qualified yes. I think that a few of these different things that you see that are the bigger ticket items here, I mean, the sidewalks, I think that those are an imperative, and I think that that's a piece that the city needs to consider how they move forward, not only for walking, but most importantly for accessibility, particularly as the community continues to age, and the ability of people to access the amenities that they rely upon starts to become constrained by the lack of ability to walk. So that's the biggest single chunk. the pedestrian bridge at nearly a $2 million price tag, I think is something that would be something that you would really want to seek funding for. It's a marquee item that I think would be wonderful for the city to install, and I think that it would really help to solidify the community's reputation as a marquee active transportation destination. But I don't necessarily think that you do that without some funding being brought to the table. The paved shoulders, this is the other kind of biggest chunk of the cost is 10 kilometers of paved shoulders. Paved shoulders actually have a net benefit in terms of the overall life cycle costs. So whereas a road with an unpaved shoulder with a gravel shoulder experiences what we call edge line fall off. So as there's kind of like additional pressure on the edge where the gravel at the seam where the gravel meets the asphalt, that's where the road starts to deteriorate, and the average is about 16 years. When you pave that shoulder out, it lengthens that to over 20. So it can make it to 20 to 25 years, and it reduces your maintenance costs. So they actually have a cost savings over the life cycle of the road. So it does end up being, when you look at the life cycle, it ends up being a savings. And then, the multi-use trails, I mean, I think these are definitely one of those things that shows a commitment to investing in the types of lifestyle issues, the types of quality of life elements that is drawing people to communities like Temiskaming Shores and Droves. As we start to see, I mean, here I am, I'm a perfect example, right? Like I'm sitting in my basement in Collingwood, working at a job that would not have been accessible to me prior to the widespread availability of kind of work from home and hybrid work. Communities like Temiskaming Shores are going to be absolute magnets for talent because you provide all the things that I mentioned when I was talking about the joy that I experienced when I was there. You've got the urban environment that provides all the amenities that people are looking for, while also providing that access to nature and that quality of life, and investing in those kind of off-road multi-use trails. The 5.5 kilometers that we've highlighted here just shows that the community is serious about really developing, refining that access to nature that makes the community such a high value proposition for people to consider. So not only do I think that that the city has the capacity, I think it behooves the city to move forward with this for the quality of life and its future. So I'm really excited about this project. Obviously, I think you can probably tell I'm a person that wears my heart on my sleeve, and this is definitely one of those projects that I get really excited about because I think it's just such a fantastic community, and there's such fantastic potential there. So that's my super nerdy deep dive into the financing and all that to say, I think it's absolutely possible.
Rob's still trying to get you to move here.
I see that.
Just a couple final thoughts then maybe from what you said. Definitely the sidewalk deficit that we kind of found out or really came to the forefront throughout this process was very enlightening, and certainly shows that there's progress to be made there over the long term for sure. But it's good that it's highlighted to show that the cost isn't over a long time period, not unattainable, and would certainly provide a lot more accessibility for those who maybe don't get it or aren't able to utilize the space that's provided right now on the roadways, or what little space there is. And then for the pedestrian bridge, you've talked about the costing of that, and there's a really strong funding application component to that would likely allow us to get some outside funding for that project. So again, that's a high ticket item, but the nature of what it is gives us a really strong basis to apply for funding in not just active travel streams, but in other streams like tourism and community development as well. So it would be unlikely that the city would fund something like that entirely on our own. And in fact, a lot of this is going to need outside funding as well. But by being proactive and including these type of things in this plan, it gives us a much stronger basis to go out and seek that funding. So this is a good first step in all of this, and puts us on the right path moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's a great note to end on, Matt, is, you know, these plans I think are most useful because the number one question that you'll get asked when you're seeking funding is, do you have a plan that tells us how you're going to use this? And now the city can say yes.
Yep, exactly.
All right. I think we'll just say thank you to everyone. This has been really fun. And I'm sorry that we went so much longer than I thought we were going to. I was hopeful that we could be done in an hour, but I guess I underestimated my own long-windedness by a fair bit. So thank you everyone who came out. Thank you to everyone if you're watching the video on the live stream or in the recording, and thank you to the City of Temiskaming Shores for having us undertake this project. It's been a lot of fun and really great.
Yep. Thanks everyone. Have a great night.
Have a good evening.